Hello YouTube, Bane666 here, and welcome to another episode of the Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, the series in which I expose feminists who misrepresent, strawman, and outright lie about the men's rights movement. Now, the last 3 episodes in this series, what I've done is I've focused on presenting the main arguments which have been used against us, if you want to call them arguments, that is. In many cases, it just comes down to ad homs and straw men and a lot of false associations. And I was planning on doing another episode or 2 like that, but I haven't had time to finish those episodes, and I have a large backlog of articles and clips that I want to go through. So I've decided to put off doing the rest of the main arguments used against us, and for now going back to the old format, and I'll probably revisit the main arguments used against us in episode 75 or maybe 100. But in the meantime, let's get stuck into it. So the first thing I want to look at today is from RationalWiki and their article on the men's rights movement, which is filled with some very, very interesting things. Now, I intend to go through most of this article over a number of episodes. I'm just going to do a chunk at a time. And I'm not actually starting at the start of the article. I will go back and do that eventually, though. But for now, I want to start at the section where they actually talk about MRA arguments. And then RationalWiki gives a rebuttal.
There are various specific things that MRAs take issue with, some of which are legitimate issues where men are actually discriminated against. All of these arguments included here are taken directly from men's rights groups. The interesting thing here is that feminism addresses essentially all of these concerns. It's as if feminism truly is about equality. One might even call feminism egalitarian.
So we hear the claim that feminism addresses essentially all of these concerns, making the argument that we often hear that, we don't need MRAs because feminism is taking care of it, right? Now, I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the men's issues that they talk about, and we see the numerous ways that they diminish and dismiss them one by one. Things like women have it worse. Yeah, sure, men have issues, but women have it worse in this particular case. So, we just need to concentrate on the women, and we'll get around to the men one day, I'm sure, somewhere down the track. Or, it's all caused by men anyway, so really it's not an issue because men are doing it to men. Apparently it only counts if women are doing it to men. And usually it doesn't even count then because, it's not the woman's fault for some reason. So it's interesting looking at their rebuttals here because in a lot of cases they actually make the arguments for us even though they're meant to be arguing against us. It's interesting. So let's have a look at the first one. The first one is circumcision.
Circumcision. Circumcision, male genital mutilation or MGM, is a violation of the rights of male children. In media, it isn't given the same treatment as female genital mutilation FGM. Steven Svoboda writes that society thinks that women's pain is simply more important than men's pain, and so we can tolerate a cultural practice of cutting baby boys' genitals.
And for the record, I agree with that. Now, let's have a look at RationalWiki's response.
First, the attention that feminism has brought to FGM has increased pressure on countries that allow MGM.
Oh, really? So, demanding that we talk exclusively about FGM has somehow made countries more aware of the need to ban MGM. Really? That's an interesting argument you have there. Next.
Ironically for MRAs, the most feminist-friendly nations are those taking the greatest action.
Okay, so the question is, Are these nations which are taking the greatest action against MGM doing so because of feminist influence or because they're Western countries? Next.
Second, it should be noted that cutting off the foreskin doesn't remotely compare with cutting off the clitoris, and sometimes the labia, in terms of damage done. At least when properly done.
Okay, once again, this is the stock standard feminist response to people saying, hey, maybe we should stop mutilating baby boys. They point out that FGM is far, far worse. And in some cases, that is true. There are actually 4 different categories of FGM, and some cases are more severe than the standard MGM, and some are not. Now, the type which is comparable is the type that removes the clitoral hood, which is the female counterpart to the male foreskin. Although the male foreskin actually has thousands of more nerves than the clitoral hood. And then there's type 4, which includes things like pricking and piercing, which you could easily argue are not as bad as amputating parts of a newborn baby boy. Now, if I wanted to be a dishonest asshole and make a feminist type argument like this one, I could compare type 4, which involves pricking and piercing, to some of the practices of circumcision done by the Australian Aboriginals, which includes splitting the penis. Now, that's obviously a lot more severe than your standard MGM, but like I said, if I wanted to play their game and compare the most extreme example to a less extreme example, it's easy to do. Now, I have to admit, this constant competition as to which one is worse really pisses me off. Why can't we just say that both are bad, and that no one, be they male or female, should have their genitals cut unless they are an adult and they are willing to have their genitals cut? It is their choice to have it done, or there is an actual medical condition which requires it. So with those 2 exceptions, why can't we all just say both are bad, both should be banned? Why is it every fucking time we bring up MGM it has to be a fucking contest? It really fucking pisses me off. Next.
FGM essentially ends sexual pleasure, while MGM reduces it.
And, of course, here we have another example of diminish and dismiss. You admit that, yeah, men have issues, and then you diminish the impact of those issues, and then you dismiss them as not really being all that important. This is the tactic we see all the fucking time when trying to talk about men's issues. Now, does FGM essentially end female sexual pleasure? Yes, in some cases, depending on the type of FGM. What about MGM reducing male sexual pleasure? Well, yeah, except in the cases where it ends it because the baby dies or has to have his penis amputated or has erection problems later in life. And unfortunately, those things are a lot more common than we care to admit. There is also the element of the psychological damage it does to a newborn to have part of his body amputated, the pain and trauma it causes him. But apparently we shouldn't worry about little things like that, right? So let me ask again, why can't we just ban them all? Why does it have to be a fucking contest? Next.
If one thinks that there are limited resources to fight genital mutilation, then it's worth focusing more on FGM than MGM.
You know, it's interesting. Often anti-feminists will say feminists concentrate too much on first world issues and don't focus on the third world where they should be focused on, right? And the normal response to this is that there's no reason why we can't talk about both. There's no reason why we can't be talking about women in the third world while at the same time talking about those issues that affect women in the first world. You know, like manspreading, which is, you know, horrendous. Absolutely fucking horrendous. But in principle, I tend to agree with this argument. There's no reason why we can't focus on numerous issues. I just wish they would spend a little less time talking about manspreading and instead actually focus on serious women's issues that actually affect women's lives. But we surely can focus on more than one thing, except when you bring up men's issues. Then all of a sudden we have limited resources, and we're only able to talk about the most serious and the most extreme cases, which seem to always affect women, even when it doesn't, like the sentencing gap, for example. But it's amazing the way they constantly contradict their own arguments. So let me ask once again, why can't we just say all genital cutting of anyone underage and incapable of giving consent is fucking wrong and should be banned? That simple. End of story. And, you know, if there is really limited sources for feminists to fight FGM and they haven't got time to fight against MGM, fine. That's actually an argument for the men's rights movement right there. We can pick up the slack, right? So maybe get out the fucking way and stop trying to stop us. If you're not going to help, that's fine. You go off and fight for your causes, but don't interfere with us when we're trying to fight for ours. Is that really too much to ask? Apparently it is. Next.
If one disagrees, however, then this is not as bad as fallacy. It also reduces infections in later life.
Okay, MGM has always been a cure in search of a disease. If you look back in the history of MGM in the West, basically at one point or another it's cured just about everything. Everything from masturbation to epilepsy to stopping black men from raping women. And the argument that it reduces infections is just more bullshit. But I tell you what, let's assume for the sake of argument that that is in fact true. Let's assume that it does reduce infections later in life. Infections which are easily cured without the amputation of a newborn baby's body part. I mean, using this logic, shouldn't we be removing the appendix of all newborn babies just in case they have a problem with it later in life? And what about young girls? They might develop breast cancer, so shouldn't all breasts be amputated just in case? I mean, breast cancer is a very serious thing, right? We wouldn't want women to develop breast cancer later in life, so we should just have mass mastectomies, right? As a standard practice. Do you see how stupid that fucking argument sounds? And need I point out that breast cancer is much more serious than an infection which is easily cured. Fucking bullshit arguments. Next.
Megan's Not Cool, interesting Instagram name, asked me, what are your thoughts on men's rights activism?
This is going to be really bad, isn't it? This is one of those videos which is going to make Bane want to drink too much. I can just tell.
Sounds cringy to me. Sounds like BS to me. But let me think about it. Let's talk about it. So women's rights is a well-known concept and phrase. Why is there such a robust women's rights and feminism movement? Because women have been historically oppressed. They weren't allowed to have certain jobs. They were not legally. They were not allowed in our recent past, in the last 100 years, or actually maybe 200 years, weren't allowed to vote.
Let me get this straight. Women weren't allowed to vote in the last 200 years. Just a question. How old do you think democracy actually is? Now, look, sure, I'm sure someone will point out that the ancient Greeks had democracy for a relatively short period of time, but yeah, modern democracy is relatively new. It hasn't been around that long. And when we look at the right for men and women to vote in modern democracies, it's a lot more complex than most people think. It's not black and white. We often hear that men have always had the right to vote. You know, the cavemen, of course, only allowed men to vote. And women only recently just got the vote. It's not that simple. And it's not universal either. It changes from country to country. There are many countries which actually enacted universal suffrage for men and women at the same time, whereas others like England only had a few years difference between male universal suffrage and female universal suffrage. And men had the added disadvantage of being required to go off in wars and die, right? In fact, that's what got them the vote earlier than women. A little thing called World War I you may have heard of. Now, at this point, someone may be saying, but Bain, before men had universal suffrage, there were some men that had the right to vote, correct? And this is true. There were a small number of men who had the right to vote before all males had universal suffrage and before all women had universal suffrage. And this was linked mainly to wealth. You had to own land and have a certain amount of wealth before you had the right to vote. And in some cases, this actually included women as well. Once again, it's not black and white. It's a lot more complex.
In political elections? I mean, can you imagine that? Can you think about that? Like, us millennials, just think about that, and that's just like saying that, that's just as crazy as saying that dogs can vote, to say that women can't vote. So, women have historically been oppressed. So, there's a women's rights movement to give them the rights that they deserve. Tell me when men have been oppressed in the recent past in history.
You know, I really, really, really get sick and tired of explaining that we don't think men are oppressed. I'm going to take a deep breath and try to remain calm and explain it one more fucking time. Because I'm really, really fucking sick of this bullshit fucking argument. Okay, to put it in really simplistic terms, feminists see the world as having an oppressor and an oppressed class. In their minds, men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed group. That is not the way MRAs see the world. We see the world as having issues for both men and women. Women have some issues that need to be dealt with. Men have some issues that need to be dealt with. And you can point out that both have certain privileges and advantages that the other doesn't. It's not one group with all the advantages and the other group with none. It's both groups having a mixture of advantages and disadvantages. And unfortunately, society tends to ignore those disadvantages and issues that men have. They're given low priority, or they're seen as less important, or non-existent, or we're told that men should just man up and not worry about it, and get on with it. It's a matter of diminishing and dismissing those issues that affect men, or outright ignorance, like this guy here. That's why the men's rights movement exists. Not because we believe men are oppressed, but because there are legitimate issues that need to be fucking talked about. Next.
We've been the top of the hierarchy of the oppressors, and the elite, and the rich, and the powerful.
Okay, so those rich men, are most of them married? So would their wives be rich as well? Have you thought about that? Probably not. But what you're talking about is a very, very small percentage of men, while at the same time excluding those women who are in similar positions. But that very small percentage of men does not represent all men. You're looking at the very, very top and ignoring all the men at the bottom. You're ignoring the fact that the vast majority of the homeless are male. I have to ask the question, why are you blind to them? Do you think they don't count? Do you think they don't exist? Do you think a small percentage of men at the top somehow erases them? Or do you think homeless men are powerful? I'd love to know. I really would.
So, I've never felt oppressed in my life as a male. My masculinity has ever been oppressed. So...
Well, I guess it's really fucking lucky then that MRAs like myself are not arguing that you are oppressed because you're male. I mean, maybe if you'd done a little bit of research before making the video, you would know that, but, you know, I guess this is fairly typical, right? Just put your opinion out there without doing the slightest bit of research and knowing what you're talking about. Unfortunately, this is all too common.
When I hear men's rights activism, the first thing that goes into my mind is that's probably people who don't believe in women's rights or feminism.
It's a strange assumption, but it's one we hear all too often. If someone dares to talk about men's issues or to suggest that men have issues, it seems it's somehow oppressing women. And this is because feminists like this one, and unfortunately way too many feminists, are addicted to the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. They can only see men as the oppressor and only women as oppressed victims, which I might add really takes away female autonomy, right? You're not a female empowerment movement if you don't see women having any autonomy, if you just see them as fucking victims. But because of this dynamic of only seeing men and women in these roles, when MRAs mention that men have issues too, meaning also men have issues as well, they somehow hear it as only men have issues and are being oppressed by women. It's so illogical from where I stand. It's like dealing with someone who believes the earth is flat.
Saying, hey, we need to keep the power. We need to talk about men too. All these women are taking away the attention from us.
So what you're suggesting is that a newborn baby boy having his genitals mutilated almost immediately after being born somehow has more power than adult women. Therefore, we don't need to advocate for his rights. Is that what you're truly arguing? It's a strange argument. It really is.
I haven't looked into the men's rights movements. I don't know who the leaders are of the men's rights movements. Probably no one does, because I think it's a pretty bullshit concept, honestly.
So he's done no research. He hasn't looked into it. He doesn't know anything about it. And based on that, he can confidently say, yeah, it's bullshit, right? Where have I heard this before? Oh, that's right. So many Red Pill movie reviews were done by people who hadn't actually seen the movie. Why am I not shocked? Why the fuck am I not surprised?
Because it doesn't make sense to me. But maybe they make legitimate points that I don't know. But right off the bat, that sounds to me like people who are trying to justify the power that they have and take attention away from legitimate social justice movements like women's rights and animal rights and racial social justice.
It's interesting that he lists animal rights above men's rights. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned about animal rights. Of course we should. I'm just suggesting that maybe we should be a little bit more concerned about the rights of men as opposed to family pets. Maybe we should be just a little bit more concerned about the rights of newborn baby boys, for example, as opposed to the family dog. I mean, in a lot of countries there's laws outlawing tail docking because it's seen as inhumane, yet we're perfectly fine with male infant circumcision, right? No double standard there. And unfortunately, here in Australia, we actually have domestic abuse shelters for pets, but not for male victims of domestic abuse. Now, once again, I have no issue with there being shelters for people's pets who are in domestic abuse situations and they need to flee and they don't want to leave their pet behind and they want to put their pet somewhere safe. That's a great idea. I just think that maybe we should have shelters for men who need it first. I think maybe that should be a priority. And if you want to do both, I've got no issue. But when you only do one and you choose the pets over men, yeah, I've got an issue with that.
Say, hey, let's also have a group advocating for men. It's like we don't need that. That's why, for instance, when people say all lives matter or white lives matter too, why that's offensive is because we already know that white lives are valued because we are not oppressed by the police.
Well, after years of researching and fact-checking what the men's rights activists were telling me, there is no denying that there are many human rights issues that uniquely or disproportionately affect men. Paternity fraud uniquely affects men. The United States Selective Service, in the case of a draft, still uniquely affects men. Workplace deaths, disproportionately men. War deaths, overwhelmingly men. Suicide, overwhelmingly men. Sentencing disparity, life expectancy, child custody, child support, false rape allegations, criminal court bias, misandry, failure to launch, boys falling behind in education, homelessness, veterans issues, infant male genital mutilation, lack of parental choice once a child is conceived, lack of resources for male victims of domestic violence. So many issues that are heartbreaking if you are the victim or you love someone who is the victim of any one of these issues.
Because we have the leg up. So that's why that's why it's offensive to say all lives matter, because we already know that. We're specifically saying Black lives matter because they're being oppressed, so we need to change that. That's what I think about men's rights activism. Of course, I believe in the rights of all people, but to put any attention into a men's rights movement just doesn't make sense, because there's so many communities and beings like animals and people of color and women and immigrants who are being oppressed. Why would you put attention onto the people of the powerful to fight for their justice that they already have?
And once again, we have the assumption, the idiotic assumption, that just because some men have power, that must mean that all men have power. Or that those men in power are somehow helping their fellow man, right? Their only interest is in helping their fellow man overcome various things, and therefore men don't have issues to deal with, which is a nonsense argument. More often than not, you see men in positions of power putting women's issues way ahead of men's issues. I guarantee you, if the majority of the homeless were women, it would be something that was talked about constantly. We would be coming up with solutions on how to fix this. There would be a national campaign to fight against it. But somehow those homeless men are just invisible, right? Because, hey, guess what? The president's a man. Therefore, homeless men don't count, right? Fucking insane argument. It's offensive. Your ignorance is offensive. It really is.
When there's so many people fighting for the justice that they deserve that they don't already have. So that's my opinion on the men's rights movement. Let me know what you think down below. Again, I'm a total noob in this concept. I had heard about it, but I pretty much don't know what they're really talking or advocating for. So if I've been ignorant in this video, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure I haven't. I'm pretty sure I know what men's rights means, and I kind of don't believe in it. In the movement and putting forward the movement. So let me know what you think about what I said down in the comments below. Again, I don't claim to have any answers here. This is a YouTube channel where I'm able to voice my opinion on how to be compassionate, how to live a fulfilling, awesome life, and to be socially responsible.
Okay, so before going on to the next men's rights issue that RationalWiki is going to try to diminish and dismiss, I actually missed a small bit from the circumcision section. I don't know how I missed it, but it wasn't part of the main argument. So let's have a quick look at that. This will only take a second.
If anything, male circumcision is to make their life easier, not having to deal with this roll of flesh that is prone to get infected, get caught on itself, or get stuff trapped in it.
Wow. What can I say about that? What a rational argument from RationalWiki. Fucking amazing, I think, is the proper response. Let's go on to the next supposed men's rights issue, and this one is the pay gap. Now, before we read this section, I don't technically think the pay gap is a men's rights issue. Now, it is something we talk about on a regular basis, and the reason why is because the claim that women get paid 77 cents to the dollar for doing exactly the same work as a man is often used as an example of female oppression by the evil men, and then it is said that all men are advantaged and all women are disadvantaged. See the last section of this video to see what I mean. And it's simply not true. It's a misrepresentation of facts. It's a lie, basically. It's propaganda. And this propaganda is used to promote the female victim narrative and the narrative that all men are privileged. And once again, this doesn't look at reality, which is a lot more complex. So that is why we talk about the pay gap, but technically it's not a men's rights issue. Although there are aspects of it which overlap with men's rights issues, as we're about to see.
Pay gap. The pay gap only exists because men work far more hours at high-stress jobs they hate with longer commutes, less flexibility, more physical risk, etc., just to be breadwinners and feed their families, only to die younger and get bashed for earning more. A study by the Congressional Budget Office in 2002 compared women and men ages 27 to 33 who had not had children, and found that the wage gap among them was 2%.
And I agree with this. This is simply reality. Men typically work longer hours than women. They work more overtime, they work more weekends, they do more physically dangerous jobs, which is why 93% of workplace deaths are male. Now, this all ties into the expectation on men by society to be the breadwinner and the provider. Now, that is a men's rights issue, although technically the pay gap is not. Now, the next bit of this supposed argument by MRAs is absolute bullshit, as I'm about to prove. And remember, folks, that the claim is that all these arguments are taken from men's rights sites. So let's have a look at this argument.
Corporations have supported the drive for women to enter the workforce in order to expand the labor supply and drive down wages.
So let's have a look at the citation for this claim. And following the citation, we see it takes us to the Spearhead, which has long since been shut down. Now, remember the claim that all these quotes supposedly come from MRA sites, and the Spearhead was not an MRA site. It was a Manosphere site. Now, it is true that they did have some MRAs write some articles for the site. Paul Elam, for example, used to write articles for the site. But it would be dishonest to characterize every single article and point of view as being from the men's rights movement. Anyone who knows anything about the Manosphere knows that we like to argue over just about everything, and that different factions, different groups, don't really agree on all that much, except that we don't like feminism. And even that can be controversial, as we don't always agree on why we don't like feminism. So claiming this came from an MRA site is dishonest, but it does get worse.
A somewhat unusual case of MRAs putting their money where their mouth is can be found in another YouTuber named Rocking Mr. E.
Now, Rocking Mr. E is not a men's rights activist, and they're just about to actually say that. So, once again, they're using a non-MRA to represent a supposed MRA argument. But let's read the next bit of text.
Mr. E agrees with the MRA sentiment that wages are driven down when both members of a household work. And thus he has opted to become a stay-at-home dad whose wife works. How this helps either side is a question in itself.
Now, it says here, Mr. E agrees with the MRA sentiment that wages are driven down. So he agrees with MRAs, which would suggest that he's not an MRA. So therefore they know he's not an MRA, yet they still present him as one. Furthermore, if you're trying to argue that a group believes in a certain thing, and that this belief in that group is prevalent, it's held by the majority of the group or all of the group, wouldn't it be logical to actually use people from that group as examples, instead of using a non-related group and an individual who doesn't belong to that group? When people use tactics like this, when people use examples like this, it tells me that they don't have an argument and they're clutching at straws and they're desperate to shit all over their opposition and put claims on their opposition which they know are not true. But let's go on and look at their rebuttal to this propaganda.
Complete crap.
Complete crap, really. That's a very logical, rational argument you have there. So you're saying that men don't work longer hours or work more overtime or more weekends or more dangerous jobs. Everything in the previous claim is just complete crap. Wow, that's fascinating. Next.
It cannot be effectively argued that it has diminished to such a point where it is irrelevant anywhere on the planet. While it is sometimes overblown when discussing first world countries, in the developing world the wage gap can be as high as 10 cents to the dollar.
And you know what? I have no problem with feminists discussing the wage gap in third world countries where there is an actual issue. However, when they constantly say that women earn 77 cents to the dollar for working exactly the same jobs as men, and their claim is that it is pure discrimination, that employers across the board are saying we will pay women 3/4 of what we pay men for doing exactly the same thing. I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. It is fucking bullshit. It doesn't take into account numerous factors. It doesn't take into account that women take time off work when they have children. It doesn't take into account different types of work, including more dangerous work. It doesn't take into account the hours that people work, or whether those hours are on weekends or overtime or night shift. It doesn't take into account any of those factors. To put it simply, the entire discussion about wages and the wage gap and the earning gap, or whatever you want to call it, is about trade-off. Now, typically, men have the advantage of earning more money, but they have the disadvantage of giving up more personal time, right? Less time with their family, less time doing the things that they might want to do, and also the risk of working more dangerous jobs, on average. Remember, 93% of workplace deaths are men. That's not because men are clumsier or don't take safety seriously. It's because they work fucking dangerous jobs more often, and they should be compensated for that. But it's a trade-off. They're trading off family time and free time for money. Often that money is to provide for their family, by the way. Whereas women have a trade-off too. They typically choose to spend more time with their family, so they have more of a work-family mix, which is the more healthy option, by the way. That's the advantage that they have. The disadvantage is they earn less money, and they find it harder to go up the corporate ladder because taking time off work to have children will do that. I'm sorry, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. there has to be a cost for your decisions. If you choose to stay at home and look after your kids, then work is going to suffer. If you choose to concentrate on your career, then you're going to spend less time with your kids and family. There has to be a trade-off somewhere. You can't have both. Next.
The wage gap does correlate with the age of the workers in question. A study of lawyers in the United States found that women with no children still earn significantly less than their male partners at the same practice.
Okay, so let's have a look at this citation, because the article actually says some very interesting things.
The gap becomes easier to see, Stacy believes, once women associates have been practicing for about 5 to 6 years or more, and if additional obligations outside the office come into play. Sometime after that point, women are more likely to find themselves with increased caregiving responsibilities, either due to childbearing or other family considerations. In our society, Stacy explains, the bulk of family obligations unfortunately still fall primarily on the shoulders of women. As women work reduced hours or take time off, the wage gap becomes more palpable. Interestingly, determining the cause of the wage gap becomes more difficult outside the lockstep associate compensation system, especially if a firm has a closed senior compensation policy and discretionary bonuses, which many firms do. This is where things get a bit fuzzy, Stacy says. After all, some believe women like Lori are unfairly squeezed into less valuable roles. Yet others argue women's personal choices are the issue and the wage gap is a feminist myth. Myth or no myth, some believe the reality of what women lawyers are experiencing must be recognized. Pat Gillette, an employment law expert and partner at Orrick in San Francisco, believes 2 issues are at play. First, studies show that women negotiate differently from men, and this may be a disadvantage for some women as they end up with smaller books of business in comparison to their male colleagues. Women need to learn, Pat shares, how to let go of their tendency to say that money is not important to them. Pat believes women lawyers end up bargaining against themselves, accepting less valuable assignments and responsibilities based on false assumptions that the firm will recognize their unique skills. Pat also believes the structure of law firms is part of the picture. The majority of law firms determine compensation based upon a formula related to business generation. At the partner level, Pat insists, the wage gap is thus more about women's smaller books of business. The solution, according to Pat, is further education of women and restructuring of compensation systems. It's time, Pat explains, that we change how we think about billable hours, partners, and lockstep pay. As founder of the Opt-in Project, a nationwide initiative focused on changing the structure of law firms to increase the retention and advancement of women in the workplace, Pat has become a catalyst of such change. Even in her own firm, she is working with the others in her firm to develop programs that give women more opportunities to succeed. Women tend to do their work more efficiently, Pat explains, so a system that recognizes the quality of their work rather than whether they bill more than anyone else makes more sense.
So the article talks about women taking time off work due to childbearing and having more caring roles associated with the family, which is basically the arguments I made. It also talks about how women typically negotiate less successfully than men because they're less focused on money. I would argue that's not because of sexism. And it also seems to be about billable hours. So if women are billing their clients less and bringing in less money, then they're earning less money because they're earning less money for the law firm. I don't understand how that is a problem or how that is because of sexism. The article seems to say the opposite of what the RationalWiki is claiming. It clearly states that women in law earn less because of choices and because of their attitudes. Now, could there be a sexist element to the wage gap, to the earnings gap? Could that 2% figure that we saw earlier be because of sexism? The answer is yes, it could be. But to jump to the conclusion that it automatically is wrong. It's something that needs to be investigated. It's possible that part of it could be due to sexism. But 2% is a long way from 77 cents to the dollar for exactly the same work. That is a fucking lie. Next.
Should we be expecting they're all lying on a couch having babies? And even more absurdly, do you think that feminists want men to have higher stress jobs than females?
Okay, no one is claiming that all women are just taking time off work constantly to have babies one after the other. That's nonsense. But I think it's pretty self-evident that most women will have at least one child at some point in their lives. And it doesn't require all women to be constantly having children for there to be an effect on average wage earnings. Your average woman having one child somewhere in her lifetime will mean that she earns less during her lifetime because of time she has taken off work. And in some cases, that's years. In many cases, women will work part-time for a decade or more. To think that that has no effect on average earnings is crazy. So you could argue that men need to take up more carers roles within the family, and that way it would free up women to concentrate more on their career. Fantastic. That's a healthier option for men. But unfortunately, men typically don't have that choice. Typically the choice to stay at home and look after the kids is that of the wife. And we see this after divorce, right? Women want custody of their kids. If you want to concentrate on your career, fine. How about shared custody? Wouldn't that be a good idea? Gives you a lot more time to concentrate on your career. Because I can tell you now, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to make choices and sacrifices. Regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, a mother or a father. Unfortunately, you can't have it all. That simple. Okay, so now we have a right-winger and a left-winger who are going to explain to us why they think MRAs are cucks. This is going to be really fucking bad, isn't it?
Moderately informed.
Men's rights activists are cucks. They're bitches.
I agree.
Okay? Do I think that in the criminal justice system, men are disproportionately sentenced to jail time far more often than women are?
Dum dum.
Absolutely. That is a fact. Like, if you find out a girl you've been talking to has been to prison, don't stop talking to her. Because, man, she had to have been one of the girls on Orange is the New Black to make it to prison. That first time offense, they don't go to prison. They don't go to prison. Maybe black girls.
That's kind of fucked up, dude.
I knew you were going to say that.
That's kind of fucked up.
I genuinely believe if you're my buddy, you've been to prison, like, maybe he fucked up. I'll give him another chance. You're a girl, you've been to prison? No! We're done. We're acquaintances now.
That's messed up, man.
Man, I gotta protect myself. There's a higher likelihood that you're fucked up if you're a woman that's been to prison, because you don't get to prison unless you're fucked up as a woman. You get away with all kinds of shit.
I hope this episode isn't the one that goes viral. Because, John, you are about to be demolished online if this shit goes viral. And I'm with you. I will stand with you and watch while it happens.
Okay, so there's disproportionate sentencing, and do I think that men are highly disadvantaged in divorce proceedings? Absolutely.
Okay, so the right-wing guy knows a couple of MRA talking points, right? He knows about the sentencing gap, and he knows about the family court issue. So why exactly are we cucks then? I have to ask. If you acknowledge that we have issues. Why exactly are we cucks?
But do I feel, as a man, so oppressed by women that I need to join an advocacy group and campaign, spend my precious free time? I just said that my coworker got laid off and I'm having to work insane hours this week. I've got precious little free time. My garden's getting neglected. Do I feel so oppressed by women that I'm going to spend my precious free time doing advocacy for men's rights? Do I feel so unequal to women that that's what I need to do with my time?
You fucking piece of shit. You had to go there, didn't you? You had to bring up the MRAs think they're oppressed fucking bullshit yet again. Every single fucking video I have to reply to this fucking bullshit claim from yet another moron who has not done the slightest bit of research or knows what they're talking about. You fucking moron. I'm not doing it. I'm not explaining yet again how we don't think we're fucking oppressed. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of fucking doing it. You fucking asshole. Fucking hell, I'm so sick of this bullshit claim from fucking morons. Every fucking video. Can you just stop it, please? Can you just address things that we actually talk about? Like the sentencing gap, for example. Can we talk about that instead? Please. For fuck's sake. And what kind of moron, I have to ask, what kind of moron admits that there is legal discrimination against men based on gender, but apparently we shouldn't do anything about it? Apparently we shouldn't worry about it. Apparently it's not a big deal. What kind of moron are you? For fuck's sake. I've been making these videos for 5 years now, almost 5 years. And I think I've seen just about everything. But, you know, this shit still shocks me. It shouldn't, but it does.
What the fuck happened to you guys? If you're such a fucking man, how did you allow the women to oppress you so hard that you've got these hurt feelings?
Yeah, you heard it here, folks. The fact that MRAs want equal sentencing for equal crimes, regardless of race and gender, that means that we're oppressed by women and we've got hurt feelings because we're not real men. It's astounding the level of idiocy coming from this guy. It really fucking is. Could you imagine talking about a different topic like this? You know, a different issue that wasn't a male-specific issue. Take cancer, for example, right? Could you imagine someone saying, "Oh, these fucking idiots trying to cure cancer. What fucking cucks. Real men just put up with cancer. They don't get hurt feelings because they've got cancer. They just toughen up and put up with it because, you know, that's what real men do." What a fucking moron. What a fucking idiot.
I'm with you. Except, I don't think that that's actually what's going on. I think, and I've used this before, and I use it a lot, I think that all of these fucking guys are used car salesmen.
Oh, of course. All MRAs are con men, right? Because society cares about men's issues so much that it's easy to get rich by talking about men's issues. Is that what you're saying? Fucking hell. It's hard to tell which of these two guys is the bigger moron. It really fucking is. It's neck and neck. It is fucking neck and neck in a moron competition right now.
I think that they see an opening. They're frustrated with one side actually being able to come out and prove that they might have a point of some of these things, because there does exist a patriarchy. There are issues that need to be resolved. I believe very heavily that there are issues that need to be resolved. There are situations in which men face a greater burden than women, but personally, I do believe that women do face a much greater burden overall than men do in this country. Sexually, fiscally, there are a ton of things, and we can have this episode sometime, but I do believe that that's the case, absolutely. But, so, these guys are seeing this happening, and they're like, no. So we have to fight back to try to convince people that that's not actually the case, that it's actually men that are being oppressed by women. You're right, they're bitches. Either way, we might not agree on where it's coming from, but we both think they're bitches. And you brought the point to me that I didn't even think about, because I've used this before, about how you go so far left, you go back around. You go so far, excuse me, you go so far, I guess, men's rights activists, that you come right back around, and you're just as fucking much of a snowflake as the feminist guys on the left.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy to me, man. Like, I'm a fucking man. Nobody's oppressing me. You get the fuck out of here with that shit.
I mean, you're being oppressed a little bit, man. We're all being oppressed a little bit.
Please elaborate.
You don't think we're being oppressed?
I'm not being oppressed.
You don't think you're being oppressed by the government?
Okay.
There you go.
Yep, they're stealing my money and funding war with it. Yeah.
They are disallowing actual freedom.